fourth, brother, the fourth day of August. All right, let's see what happens from here. Those of you who are on the stream, all right, my green hair, I think we've got the problem fixed. It's just going to take a few more days to do it. All right, as we, I thought with the election of I was sure with the election of President Trump, we were going to back down from Biden's threat of nuclear war with Russia. Boy, was I wrong. I think we are closer to nuclear war now than we were even the last 2 to 3 weeks of the Biden administration. So I've got several, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the fact that the major news media is not covering the coup d'etat against Trump in his first administration. And there better be some people indicted here before too long. Now, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about Gaza, an update on Gaza because of Albanese. And, well, there's a couple other things I want to squeeze into this hour. But on July 18th, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, released a series of documents pertaining to the fake narrative that Russia had meddled in the 2016 presidential election on behalf of Donald Trump, leading to the defeat of Democratic Party nominee Hillary Clinton. Gabbard said this about 3 weeks ago. The information we are releasing today clearly shows there was a treasonous conspiracy in 2016 committed by officials at the highest level of our government. Their goal was to subvert the will of the American people and enact what was essentially a years-long coup with the objective of trying to usurp the president from fulfilling the mandate bestowed upon him by the American people. The truth of the matter, of course, is far worse than that. And it does involve a foreign government, but not Russia, not China, not Iran, not North Korea, not Venezuela, not Cuba, or even nostalgic remembrances of the old Soviet Union. The government that is involved in this is the United Kingdom of Great Britain, supposedly our special partner, and that operation is very much alive today as it was in 1776. Now, when I first had LaRouche on my radio program over 25 years ago, nearly 30 years ago, because I was so interested as to why everybody hated him. The left wing hated him. The right wing hated him. Hits were advertised in the New York Times to kill him. I finally brought him on my show, and one of the underlying overarching themes that he constantly brought out was, and for which he was slandered and vilified for decades as a result, was identifying the British Empire, including the British monarchy and the City of London, for orchestrating numerous wars, coups, assassinations, including American presidents, for 250 years since the successful War of Independence. And what Americans need to know is that the British plan to pit the United States against Russia, this plan that's on right now to pit us against Russia, is launched by Prime Minister Winston Churchill even before World War II ended. On May 22nd, 1945, only 2 weeks after VE Day, while the war was still raging in the Pacific, Sir Winston Churchill issued a report called Operation Unthinkable, whose purpose was clearly stated, and I'm quoting from it. The overall or political object is to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire. And Churchill proposed that an invasion of Russia be launched as early as July 1st, 1945. Now, the decision to drop the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki exactly 80 years ago, this week, killing hundreds of thousands of people when the Japanese surrender was already under negotiations through the Vatican and other channels, must be understood from the standpoint of Churchill's agenda and what Churchill was pushing. The nuclear bombs did nothing to end the war. It was already ending, but heralded the first phase of Churchill's desired preemptive nuclear war against Russia. So Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, in March of '46, was to bring the Americans into his plan and resulted in a Cold War which dragged on for how long? Until at least the fall of the Berlin Wall in November of 1989. Now, long after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, London's The Economist published in March of 2007 an editorial entitled "The European Union at 100, which called for President Obama, a full year before the Democratic primary elections had even taken place, to threaten President Putin with nuclear weapons to keep him from invading Ukraine." And this remarkably prescient imaginary future scenario reads in retrospect like a script for the events which unfolded starting in July of 2013, when the Obama administration, in collusion with British intelligence, overthrew the elected government of Ukraine and brought in a pro-Nazi regime complete with swastika tattoos, torchlit marches celebrating the notorious mass murderer Stepan Bandera. And the reason for the British orchestrated confrontation between the United States and Russia was so that British interests, again the Crown and the City of London, could consolidate a global financial empire based on massive depopulation and looting raw materials and labor. Now, China's Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS New Development Bank, launched in 2013-2014, proposed a great threat to what King Charles has referred to as, get this, Global Britain. The British set out to disrupt these developments at all costs, and the fear of the British and their American counterparts was that Donald Trump was going to have, as he was saying in his pre-election campaigning, good relations with Russia and China. And that would disrupt their drive for financial dictatorship. So this is why the U.S.-Russian relations had to be sabotaged. And the Russiagate narrative served that purpose nicely. Now, what DNI Director Gabbard has released thus far shows that in August, September, and December of 2016, the intelligence community had already determined that Russia was neither capable of nor even interested in hacking the U.S. presidential election. And she has the documents. She's holding them up in her hand. We have the documents to prove this. But in spite of that, on December 9th, 2016, after the successful election of Trump, President Obama convened a White House meeting which included CIA Director Brennan, FBI Director Comey, DNI Director Clapper, Attorney General Loretta Lynch, Secretary of State John Kerry, Assistant Secretary Victoria Nuland, National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and others. This is what you call the biggies. Orders were given to concoct a false narrative of Russian interference in the U.S. election, despite the fact that everyone there knew the evidence did not substantiate their claims. Hence, Secretary Gabbard's use of the term treasonous. So the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence report on September 18th, 2020, released by Gabbard on July 23rd, leaves no doubt that this was the case. Now, what has not yet been mentioned by Gabbard, other than limited reference to the Steele dossier, is the role of British intelligence in manufacturing the Russiagate story. And the role played by key individuals, such as director Robert Hannigan, MI chief Richard Dearlove, and former Prime Minister Tony Blair, and others of that British ilk. And it is imperative that those working, researching, archiving, texting, sharing all that information to get to the bottom of this operation understand that this was what was treasonous about Russiagate. And it was not simply the desire to undermine an incoming president, but that the Americans involved, from President Obama and CIA Director Brennan down to lower-level bureaucrats like Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, were working, whether they knew it or not, on behalf of a foreign power, the British Empire, to drive the United States into war against Russia, which put the lives of every man, woman, and child on this planet in jeopardy. And in the estimation of some, and I agree with them, this is worse than treason. And there had damn well better be some indictments coming from this. Now, Medvedev, his dead hand message to Trump to forget about decapitating Moscow. This is where we are in a far more serious situation now than we were the last 3 weeks of Biden's administration. The deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, also a former president of Russia, as you remember, delivered a very chilling message a week ago in response to President Donald Trump might have thought as just a normal, everyday, business as usual threat. It started with this reckless, absolutely reckless U.S. Senator Grams declaring that Russia will be sadly mistaken if they fail to obey Trump's order to negotiate. Medvedev's response was that Russia decides when to negotiate. America does not decide for us when we will negotiate. We will decide that ourselves. So that provoked Trump to post on Truth Social his exasperation that India in particular would continue trading with Russia and not submit to Trump's sanctions warfare. And he said, I don't care what India does with Russia. They can take their dead economies down together for all I care. This isn't diplomacy. This is thuggishness, just thugs. He said, we've done little business with India. Their tariffs are too high, among the highest in the world. Likewise, Russia and the USA do almost no business together, so let's keep it that way. And tell Medvedev, the failed former president of Russia, who thinks he's still president, to watch his words. He's entering very dangerous territory. Now, if I hadn't read that myself, and someone said they were quoting Trump as saying this kind of absolute political crap, I wouldn't have believed it. You don't talk to a nuclear-armed country like this. Now, the last comment that prompted Medvedev to invoke the dreaded dead hand, Russia's ultimate thermonuclear threat from the Soviet days, I know you're familiar with this, but should a preemptive strike wipe out the leadership in Moscow, special Russian missiles will automatically deploy. I didn't hear that coming in on K-Talk. Instead of warheads, these missiles carry communication devices designed to transmit Soviet nuclear launch codes when this was set up in the 80s. They would issue orders to Russia's nuclear missile fleet to launch a full nuclear war exchange. In other words, and Trump had once mentioned the fact of sending 60 nukes to the Ukraine. To the Kremlin, to Moscow, to make sure the job got done. The leadership might be dead as a result of that, but the order would still go out regardless, blowing up, literally, the conceit that a preemptive strike would leave its initiators alive and well. And there are those in the Pentagon that actually believe that you can do a decapitation strike against the Soviet or against Russia with low-level flying Trident missiles carrying multiple nuclear warheads from these two submarines. The dumbest thing about that, and I am not a nuclear submarine jockey by any means, but these nukes, these Ohio class nukes or subs, of which I think we have between 9 and 12. I'm not sure exactly how many. They just go out and they sit. They sit on the bottom. Obviously not in the deepest waters. They sit on the bottom waiting for commands. And they operate with the least amount of interior noise possible. Imagine the screening that has to be done with the various seamen who want to be a part of an Ohio-class submarine that could go there for weeks and just sit on the bottom of the ocean. Now they start up their engines and they move like these two that have been commanded by Trump to do, immediately tell the Soviet Navy where they're at. And it only takes one Soviet torpedo to take out an Ohio-class submarine. So Medvedev's, what he said was this. If some words from the former president of Russia trigger such a nervous reaction from the high and mighty president of the United States, then Russia is doing everything right and will continue to proceed along its own path. As for the dead economies of India and Russia and the entering of dangerous territory, well, Trump should recall his favorite film about the walking dead and also how dangerous that dead hand can be. Now, Ritter, I just couldn't wait for Ritter's comments on this, explained the reason and the credibility of Medvedev's message in his comments, Trump and Medvedev's dangerous exchange of words. And Ritter said this: President Trump has become enthralled with the Israeli Nasrallah solution. Leadership decapitation, middle management disruption, designed to bring about the rapid collapse of a governmental system. It was tried and it failed in Iran. But Trump is being advised by Russophobes who believe that the U.S. can successfully implement such a plan against Russia. This plan begins with sanctions, as all plans do, and then it ends with a decapitation strike on Moscow. Trump's imagined conversation with Putin, where he threatened to bomb the SHIT out of Moscow, is indicative of the president's thinking in this regard. The preferred decapitation strike is done using B-52 bombers launching cruise missiles, accompanied by Trident missiles launched from Ohio-class submarines operating off the coast of Russia, allowing for a flatter trajectory flight and shorter flight time. Medvedev's comment about the dead hand indicates that Russia is well aware of Trump's plans. The dead hand, or perimeter system, and I'm still quoting Ritter, is a long-standing fail-safe mechanism plan which guarantees a full-scale nuclear retaliation in case any nation is foolish enough to try a decapitation strike. Medvedev's mentioning of it is not a not too gentle reminder to Trump and his planners that it is suicide to think of a preemptive decapitation strike against Russia. Hopefully, this message gets through. Otherwise, the walking dead illusion made by Medvedev will be the future of the United States and the world. And then Ritter on Judge Napolitano's podcast said, if this happens, you want to be in the group that's instantly vaporized. You do not want to survive a nuclear war because of what will follow. Complete total martial law, suspension of the Constitution, and the hell that will bring. Now, I was saying a year ago before the election that Trump was getting some very bad advice on some of the comments that he was making at the time. Now it seems like that's about all the advice he is getting, from Russophobes to Israeli files. So what passes for strategic competence these days is beyond dangerous. Secretary of State Rubio was asked in a Fox News interview just a week ago with Brian Kilmeade. It was last Thursday morning, about President Trump's 10 days for peace or else ultimatum to Russia. Rubio reported that, and thank goodness, that U.S. officials continued to engage with the Russian side. Talks were held July 28th and 29th, not with Putin, but with some of Putin's top people, in hopes of arriving at some understanding on a path forward that could lead to peace, he said. Rubio. Then came the threats. He said, however, we have not seen any progress on that. So at some point, President Trump has got to make a decision here about how much to continue to engage in an effort to do ceasefires if one of the two sides is not interested in one. He said the president has options, naming secondary sanctions on oil sales of Russian oil, which is a huge part of their revenue. There's banking, sectorial banking sanctions that would also be very powerful. We hope to avoid these options, but obviously the president's not going to wait forever. Then Rubio dismissed the dead hand warning delivered by Medvedev in response to such ultimatums as not really a factor. Now, in my limited militaristic understanding, the dead hand would be a very big factor, but there are all kinds of people saying it's not true. They don't really have anything like that. And when the Pershing missiles were sent to Europe, that's when the Russians set it up, back in the 80s. And the dead hand, as I was quoting from Tulsi Gabbard and from Ritter, was essentially, if communications between the Kremlin and the net that oversees and controls Russia's nuclear forces was disrupted, which would happen with a decapitation strike on Moscow, then this cascade of events would be set off where the dead hand wasn't so much the launching of the missile, but the sending out to all the missile locations spread throughout Russia and Siberia to launch. How long after the initial attack by the United States on Russia would that occur? We don't know. I've seen some estimations as late as 2 weeks after the decapitation strike on Moscow, the dead hand would take effect. Well, when Fox's Kilmeade asked the big inconvenient question of Rubio, do you think Russia is in a position to confront America militarily? Rubio ruled that out, arguing that outside of the possibility of the use of a tactical nuclear weapon or some miscalculation occurring here or there, he said we should not even think about such a possibility. He said that's not a fathomable thing. I mean, he said, understand a war between the United States and Russia is not something we can ever see happen. These are the two largest nuclear weapon militaries in the world, and danger would be just too great. He said, I don't think there's any doubt that from a conventional military capability, the Russians could not take on the United States, or frankly, many of the countries in Europe for that matter. They struggled with the Ukraine, who now is the largest army in Europe, but at that time of being invaded was not. I think they would struggle on a conventional front greatly. Now, I hope I misunderstood what Rubio's saying here. I'm quoting again. The Russians could not take on the United States, or frankly, many of the countries in Europe. For that matter, he said they've struggled with the Ukraine, who is the largest army in Europe, but at the time of being invaded was not. I think they would struggle on a conventional front greatly. Now, either Rubio is lying, or he is grossly unaware of what is happening in the Ukraine. And as Secretary of State, he should know 1,000,000 times more than what I know. The Ukrainian army is not the largest army in Europe. It's the other way around. The Russian army is the largest army in Europe. And the Europeans would just as soon they left Europe and went back to Eurasia, went back inside the Russian border. Now, some of the experts who've been proven right a multiple of times claim that since Russia has complete control of the air and Putin has decided on bombardment rather than risking that much more or many more Russian lives and taking more territory, it is the Russian army that is bombing the SHIT out of the enemy, not the other way around, according to Trump. And so Putin has opted more for a bombardment approach because they can produce in 1 month in artillery, according to the experts, what would take the United States and Europe an entire year to do. And Putin just announced the other day they have more Oreshnik missiles being manufactured. There are those in American military leadership who say that's a bunch of horsemanookie. They don't have anything like that, even though they set one off in the Donbass against Rheinmetall a year ago. So Rubio finished with this. I think what you worry more about is not an all-out war with Russia. I think what you worry more about is a skirmish or a miscalculation that leads up to the start of a conflict. Because since the Russians are not very good at conventional weaponry, they would almost invariably have to rely on other means, like a tactical nuclear weapon on the battlefield, to sort of escalate in an effort to de-escalate a fight. So you'd have to worry about that. But we shouldn't even think about it because that's not something that is plausible or frankly feasible for either side. Again, Rubio is either lying or he's stupid when he says Russians are not very good at conventional weaponry. Maybe I misunderstand the meaning of the word conventional weaponry. But it seems to me that the weaponry the Russians have been using that keep them advancing 4, 5, 6 kilometers a day, and there's just Petrovsk. Well, I mean, once Petrovsk is taken, it's over with. And some of the best experts have said a month, maybe 2 months. And they want to hurry. The Russians want to hurry up and get it done before the rainy season starts, and turns everything back into mud again, as they've done for the last 2 or 3 years. And then all of a sudden, you've got the rainy season, everything's mud. Then you have to wait till the freeze season, till the mud freezes before they can move their artillery again. The Russians are not very good at conventional weaponry, and yet they keep advancing and advancing. I hope you get as much of a kick out of this as I do. Now, as important as that is, and that seems to be the one event out there that may have the biggest effect on our lives here in America in the shortest amount of time, I want to talk about the situation in Gaza with a less than half hour that's left here, because that is an element in the perfect storm that's going on as well. And the inability of the world community to stop something which is now, even in the mainstream media after 2 years, finally being recognized for what it is: genocide. And the unbelievable details are known to the whole world community. Finally, world media is beginning to acknowledge this. So I want to start with, because we can't rely, if there's no immediate remedy for the ongoing genocide in Gaza, I think you can only see Gaza right now as a mirror of the moral condition of humanity as a whole. I think, especially Americans, because we're all a part of the genocide, you know we're a part of it. Our tax dollars are starving these babies. We might just fall short of the moral test of our own survivability if we can't remedy this in the short term. Because people are starving even as I'm talking here. And it's a question of a very short time when everybody will be dead or displaced from Gaza. Now, I want to make a very quick report here on something that happened at a UN special at the 59th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva back on July 3rd. And it was the UN special rapporteur Francesca Albanese, who even Trump has made disparaging comments about her. And because she has been there on the ground, she has introduced a 24-page report basically naming the corporations who are complicit because they are profiteering from the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And this is quite a shocker, but I think she provides quite a few details on how 60 different corporate actors, 48 of whom she names by name, arms manufacturers, banks, tech companies, energy firms, academic institutions, all who are otherwise profiteering in one way or another from this ongoing situation by supplying of machines that are operating the AI programs, which are helping in targeting and automatic decision-making and killing the Palestinians who are simply trying to get food. It's an absolutely unbelievable story. And it's obviously not to be denied. I think this report deserves international scrutiny and investigation, but obviously it hit such a raw nerve that Marco Rubio, once he found out about this report, immediately put sanctions on Francesca Albanese. This is unbelievable. Instead of offering evidence that might contradict her claims, he just put sanctions on her. I mean, there's no question that many of the elements of what she is saying in this report cannot be denied. For example, the fact that the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a death trap. We know that. And it's been complicit in luring desperate people who are very hungry to come out and get food. And when they come out of their hiding into the open, they're shot. I talked to another person this weekend who said they don't listen to my show anymore. And I think there's more and more who don't because the numbers are getting less. Because of this position I've taken. It's not, I haven't taken a position. I'm just telling you what the international news is saying. And it's finally reached mainstream media because it can't be covered up or hidden anymore. I mean, it's an absolutely unbelievable story. So I think, there was this UN meeting on Palestinian statehood, not at the highest level of the UN, but obviously important that it took place. In the meantime, another 28 nations have called for recognition of the Palestinian state. Canada, for example, has been put under pressure from the Trump administration for all of a sudden changing their attitude on the question of the Palestinian state, because Canada was taking positions against it. No, we don't need a Palestinian state. We just need to get rid of the Palestinians. Like old King James the Second said about the Scots. He said the only problem with Scotland is that it's full of Scots. And now Canada is being put under pressure. Carney, the prime minister up there, did you see the questions about the legitimacy of his election? Ooh, see where that one goes. Is saying, no, we need a Palestinian state. Anybody with half a brain knows we need a Palestinian state. Well, there was a Palestinian state before 1948 when their Palestinian state started to be taken away from them. I've been saying this for a long time now, that given the complexities of this situation, the fact that Israel could not do what they are doing without the backing of us, the U.S., the United States. I personally think that the two-state solution in conjunction with the Oasis Plan can only be realized if there's a new international security and development architecture. Because like any other effort to have a solution to a partial problem like the Middle East, given the combination of the powers that are operating there, it just isn't going to function. And it's absolutely relevant in respect to the Ukraine crisis. Now, President Trump has obviously created havoc in the international economic situation by his tariff war. What was celebrated as the biggest deal ever by Trump himself after he met with the EU Commission head Ursula von der Leyen in Scotland last Sunday, that deal is for sure extremely bad for Europe. It's devastating to the German economy and for the East European economies. It's definitely going to hurt them, but it's already starting to fall apart. And what supposedly was an agreed upon deal is now being debated because the White House claimed that part of that deal was that the European Union would buy American liquid gas for the next 3 years for a total of $750 billion, $250 billion a year. Now, the EU is saying that they're not having the confidence to agree to that. Because whoever buys energy is a matter of the state and the industrial corporations or the individual firms, so a lot is hanging in the air over that. But the deal is also supposed to involve other investments, because Trump claimed that the European Union agreed to have $600 billion additional direct investment in the United States. And then after that, the European Union said no. The $250 billion is part of the $600 billion. And in any case, they can't decide that because these investments are a matter for private investors, not for the government. And also, the White House claimed that most of the weapons for the European efforts in the Ukraine will be bought in the United States. And the EU said that's not really what they agreed upon because these weapons have to be bought in Europe. What would make the deal? Well, the tariffs. Also, the EU says that the agreement on the tariffs of 50% of aluminum and steel, they don't want that. They want to go back to the old system. And concerning the health certificates regarding pork and milk products, they don't agree with Trump's idea either. So it seems that while von der Leyen clearly completely capitulated, and in that way she puts into question the whole European Union, because the whole argument for why we need such a gigantic bureaucracy in Brussels was always that individual nations that were not strong enough to measure up against world players like China or Russia or the United States. But this time it comes to a test because von der Leyen completely, utterly fails to defend the interests of the European member countries. So, why have the European Union bureaucracy when they're not capable of defending the interests of the European Union? Now, all of this, remember, all of this is taking place when the initial hope that President Trump would remedy the situation with Russia is looking increasingly questionable. First of all, his supposed dealings with British Prime Minister Starmer sending weapons again to the Ukraine. I mean, has Trump forgotten that it was the British role in Russiagate that ruined his first presidency? And now he's back in bed with the Brits? I mean, it's not clear. Is he forgetting that? Is he playing a game? Is he really angry at Putin, which he has said now many times? I mean, in any case, the coalition of the willing armament policies and their unrestrained effort to try to divide Russia into many pieces and defeat Russia has caused Foreign Minister Lavrov to write an article, which was published in Rossiya Gazeta at the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act on European Security, in which he says Europe is becoming the Fourth Reich. He said Germany and the entire European Union are becoming a Fourth Reich because of their unrestrained armament and militarization. He said if Russia, which fought, what they call the Great Patriotic War in the Second World War against the Nazis, saying that Germany and the EU are in that tradition, he says, I think this is very worrisome. Because everyone in Europe, at least now, I would think at this point in time, with discussions of having the Taurus missile being delivered to the Ukraine, for German troops, Polish troops, French troops on the ground in the Ukraine, as all of these things are coming together there, I would think everybody in Europe would start having some sleepless nights because if that policy is not changed, we're taking another giant step toward war. Now, Lavrov has reached out with an olive branch, saying that there needs to be a new European security architecture and that the Europeans do have a place at the table of such a new architecture. He said only if they abandon the dictate and their colonial instincts. Well, that's one of the premier aspects of the current British position, is they want colonial control of a separated Russia after a decapitation strike. So then naturally, you have these unbelievable statements by the U.S. Army commander of the European and African forces, General Donahue, I think is a 4-star, who basically said the United States and NATO would be ready to separate Kaliningrad from Russia and occupy it. That's, to me, just as crazy as if Japan said, we're going to occupy the Hawaiian Islands. They're really ours, and there's more Japanese extraction people in Hawaii than there are Caucasian Americans. And so we are going to just take over the Hawaiian Islands and free the people from American aggression. Kaliningrad is Russia, even though it's not touching Russia. It's actually part of the Russian state, and that it is regarded as the utmost threat to the vital interests of Russia. He was not called back by either Defense Secretary Hegseth or Trump. So is Trump backing Donohue's statement that they could take Kaliningrad? I mean, that would be devastating. That would only be one step away from open military conflict. Are Russians going to sit there and let them take Kaliningrad? That's where Russia has most of, I don't know most, but a large contingent of their Iskander missiles, their hypersonic missiles, are in Kaliningrad. And there's this opening through Lithuania, kind of a yellow brick road that the Russians use to get supplies to Kaliningrad that aren't immediately available through the waterways. Now, all of this is taking place in light of the second batch of documents being released by DNI Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard to prevent the victory of Trump in the first term, and then the attempt to ruin his term in the second term. In the meantime, Senator Chuck Grassley has also said that there is evidence of a weaponization of the FBI under the Obama administration in an attempt to prevent and then ruin the Trump presidency. So normally you would say that this would be the top item of a scandal in the mass media. They've been completely silent about it, only quoting Obama, who has come out and said the whole thing is ridiculous. Well, when you're dealing with PhD level liars, Clapper, Brennan, Newland, Comey, Kerry, what else would you expect them to be saying? And there are some of the elements that show that you shape the world order, and the elements that are involved of this current world situation completely out of control. This means you have to increase your own awareness of what is going on, and any kind of, and I'm not getting apocalyptic, but it's getting to a point where you kind of better renew your efforts to make sure that your health is good, your body is strong. Oh, mentioning that, there were some people who wanted to take advantage of my half off for a new patient that came crowding in at the end because they were away on vacation or something like that. I'll leave that up for another week. If you are hurting, or if you just want to be checked, there's no charge for that. But if you are hurting in any way, I don't know that there's a better time for some personal, private interests given to you in your own body in what may be happening in the days ahead of us during the August. And you know how many wars were started in August. I'm still offering that half off for one more week to hopefully take care of those who came in at the last minute and didn't get scheduled. You'd call 801-523-1890, 801-523-1890. I think there's at least a couple of spots left. Now, we're reaching a point where more is needed than just sitting around talking about these things. This tweet that came out from President Trump on Truth Social, where he says this: based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Which, of course, comes on the heels of an escalation of verbal exchanges between former President Medvedev and President Trump, which has been escalating over the last several days, as you know. Basically, when Trump had shifted his policy to send weapons to Ukraine and then gave a 50-day ultimatum for Russia to end the special military operation, and then just the other day, he changed from 10 days or 50 days to 10 days, and then he gave a deadline now less than 10 days, which I think is effective today, which Russia has already said they're not going to do because it doesn't address the core of Russia's security measures, which is Ukraine not being in the NATO and no offensive weapons systems at the border of Russia. So when Trump shortened that 50 to 10 days, Medvedev was the one who put out the statement. He said Trump is playing the ultimate game with Russia. 50 days or 10, he should remember 2 things. First, Russia isn't Israel and Russia is not Iran. Second, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road, Donald. That was not put out by Medvedev. That was just a few days ago. Now, Trump has answered. It looks like we're through at K-Talk. Trump has answered the statement by Medvedev with the announcement that he has ordered the 2 nuclear submarines in the appropriate regions. Some assume it's the Baltic Sea, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, who knows? I have no idea where these appropriate places might be. But this is an escalation of the most seriousness, and it should alarm the whole world. I don't want to alarm you. I'm just trying to get you to have a better, more clear understanding of what's going on here and take appropriate steps in your own life and the awareness that you have growing around you, and keep your wits about you. I'll see you all tomorrow.